We are beginning our stewardship campaign today, and for the next 3 weeks, we will be hearing the three parables from Matthew 25. Last month, the session voted to become a Matthew 25 congregation, which is a Presbyterian-wide effort to live into the story at the end of this chapter, which we'll hear at the end of the month, where Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it for one of the least of these, you did it to me." Today, though, we get the parable of the bridesmaids. And I want to start off by saying that I'm opposed to the entire premise that women should be just sitting around in the dark waiting for some guy to show up. Okay, I got it out of me. Okay, and I know that's not the point of the parable, but some days it is for me. Some days I have to question Matthew's assumptions. Why didn't the bridegroom bring his own lamp? What was the best man doing? These are the questions, really, that we should be asking. Our weddings still have bridesmaids, but other than that, this story from Matthew's gospel doesn't match our experience. When we invite people to our weddings today, we tell them to show up at a particular time. But in Jesus' day, the invitation to the wedding would have said, "Please join us on Tuesday-ish, or maybe Wednesday," because the party didn't start till the bridegroom got there. And if his camel were stuck in a traffic jam in Tel Aviv, or if he were in line to vote, or if he were late at work, whatever, the party was going to be delayed till he arrived. So the bridesmaids had gotten to the church early, and they helped their friend into her wedding finery. They put on their own fancy dresses, and then they took their lamps to line the road. So when the groom arrived, he'd be able to see where he was going. These bridesmaids, these friends of the bride and groom who were so excited to help in the celebration, also had to prepare. They had to think about oil. And we're told that 5 of them did and 5 of them didn't. The wise ones recognized the wait could be long. The foolish bridesmaids, on the other hand, maybe they were just so excited about the party that was to come that they forgot to pack it when they threw in their party shoes. For all we know, the other bridesmaids had vats of oil sitting at home. But a fat lot of good it was going to do them here. This text is not about calling us to hoard or to stockpile our oil or our resources. Because you can sock away all the oil in the world, but if you don't bring it with you when you head to the wedding, it won't do you any good to light the path. You cannot be the light of the world or the light for the bridegroom if you leave your oil squirreled away in the bank. Oil is only of value when you're willing to use it to be a light. So 5 of the bridesmaids were there, ready to use their light, and 5 were not. Note, this is not an us versus them text, although Matthew will sometimes do that, put people into camps. In this case, all 10 bridesmaids were invited to the party and were close enough friends of the couple that they got to serve this task. We shouldn't be looking for the foolish bridesmaids somewhere else, outside of our community. We are them, wise and foolish, all together in the same congregation. Thanks be to God. We're together in this. And this particular bridegroom was very late. All of the maids had fallen asleep, and when they heard the shout that he was on the way, they woke up and they got busy making preparations, trimming their wicks and refilling their lamps. And the ones who had left the extra oil at home tried to borrow some from the wise. And at this point in the story, it's the wise bridesmaids who look a bit like hoarders. You can almost hear them saying, "A lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine." Come on, we want to say, just give them a little. You can share. I confess at this point in the text, I'm a little conflicted. On the one hand, I'm reluctant to buy into Matthew's model of scarcity that doesn't allow for bridesmaids to share their light. Why can't the ones with enough oil say, "Here, sister, walk with me. The light from my lamp will be enough for both of us to find our way to the feast"? We're called to be generous with the other bridesmaids with whom we're journeying through life. It's important to recognize that yes, our preparations do matter, and they are essential, but they're not the whole story. Some of us, as bridesmaids, have access to more oil. I look around at the world and I see bridesmaids that have so many physical needs not being met, and I think, How are people who have to struggle for their literal daily bread or their physical safety, how are they supposed to have the resources, the energy, the focus to be wise bridesmaids? Because we live in a world where some of us have access to lots of oil. We can fill our lamps whenever we want to. We also live in a world where others don't have the same access to stores and stockpiles. And I can't read this text without thinking about my privilege and my opportunity and how easy it is for me to ignore how difficult it is for the other bridesmaids. If I'm working 3 jobs to pay the bills, would I even be able to come to the party? I'd probably be too busy working. Some bridesmaids face racial prejudice when they go to buy oil for their lamps, with employees following them around the store because they don't look like they belong. There are lots of other situations that can keep our neighbors from accessing resources, from being wise bridesmaids. Think about 1 in 4 San Franciscans who are food insecure, who don't know where their food will come from this week. Despite increased attention to the issue, as many of you know, conditions continue to make the stresses and strains of life challenging here. How are these bridesmaids supposed to find enough oil when they can't feed their kids or afford their rent? We cannot pretend that we were the ones who were wise enough to gather oil without acknowledging we live in a society that actively keeps people from succeeding the way we do. So that's the one hand. On the other hand, we are called to prepare. And how are we preparing and stewarding our resources as we wait for the bridegroom? What are the reserves you have to prepare for yourself that others can't prepare for you, no matter how much they might want to? I think about some of the homebound members of churches I've served with whom I visited back in the days when I could visit people. I miss visiting people. And it wasn't uncommon to hear them say things like, I wish I could keep my pledge to the church as high as it used to be because I care so much about this church and I want to build for the future, but my medical bills have doubled and I just have enough to get by. I still give what I can, but I can't give as much as I'd like. These people and others who have built for and provided for our churches would like nothing more than to fill each of our lamps to fund the budget of Calvary and other churches. And that's not how it works. We each have our part to play here at Calvary to prepare for God's kingdom. If we all contribute, then the burden is less on everybody. I don't know what your part in the contribution is. I can't just say, give us X amount of money and we'll have all we need. What I do know is that God is faithful. And when we consider the future in our own discernment, when we look at the resources we have, when we figure out what it is we need to bring so we'll have enough to wait for the bridegroom, God provides. This oil crisis is about putting things in the right order. Are we prioritizing our time and talents to serve God and to serve others? When my husband and I first started pledging, we were newly married. He was in medical school and I had just started a job that paid almost nothing. We had no money, but we learned that if we paid the important things at the beginning of the month, then we had enough to make it to the end of the month. Now, of course, we have more money and we can give more money to the church and we give money to other charities and we fund my shoe collection, but we have chosen to prioritize our giving to the church first. In response to what church has given us, we make our biggest contribution each year to our church, and we find that we still have plenty to donate to other charities that matter too. Because there were times in my life when I felt like a foolish bridesmaid. I was out of oil. I was a victim of my own bad planning. And sure enough, someone from church would come alongside me and walk with me through the shadows of the night, their light helping me on the way. I'll tell you more about one of those times in my next sermon. But it was because of the kindness of church people that I came to know and experience the grace of God. I want to keep giving in response to that grace so others can know of it too. So how can you help shine light for someone on the path when they can't find their way? Or think about, when in your life did someone hold the lamp for you so that you could find your way back to the path? Because we are called to light the path. The bridegroom shows up and tells people, "Keep awake, for you know neither the day nor the hour." And on one level, this story is about Jesus' return. His followers had been expecting his return any day. And you can imagine that if you think Jesus is coming back tomorrow, you maybe don't worry so much about getting the laundry done this afternoon. So Matthew reminds his community to keep awake. What do we do while we wait for Jesus' return? Keep awake. It doesn't mean we just sit there and look down the road so we'll see the bridegroom when he approaches. It's not a passive waiting. We're to keep our lamps trimmed and burning, as the song says. It's an active waiting, keeping a light on the path to mark the way. There's a lot of ways we can do this, but here's how I've seen it in a couple of places. We actively wait when we serve the community, making the path easier for others. We actively wait when we call and send cards to people who are alone, especially during this time when we can't be together the way we wish we could. We actively wait when we educate ourselves about the way our society keeps some bridesmaids from having all of the same opportunities that we do. We are called to be wise bridesmaids. We're called to be generous ones. We keep our lamps trimmed and burning so that when the bridegroom shows up, we'll be ready to join the party. This text is about waiting for God's kingdom with watchful joy. I know neither the day nor the hour either, but I do know this. It is in our preparations, in the spending of time serving alongside you, that the light shines bright enough that I can see a little further down the road. We can make the entire journey that way. As we move along in our stewardship campaign, even though it is in the midst of uncertain economic times, I invite you this week to consider the oil that you have to bring with you as you actively wait for God's kingdom. It is in the shadows of the night that the world needs light the most. So let us bring our oil in watchful joy. Let us pray with anticipation and excitement about what God is dreaming for Calvary even now. Thanks be to God. Amen.